Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Thursday, September 24th. Tonight, our Hanauma Bay Education Program, Hanauma Talks, presents, we have Irene Kelly, and she'll be presenting partnerships in sea turtle recovery of Pacific-wide Ohana. So without further ado, Irene.
Thank you. Thanks, Gavin. Thanks, Taylor. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us virtually today. So as Gavin said, my name is Irene Kelly. I'm the Sea Turtle Recovery Coordinator for NOAA Fisheries here in Hawaii. I'm based here on Oahu. For those of you that are familiar with NOAA, you may know that there's kind of two sides to the house. There's a research side of NOAA, and then there's a management side of NOAA. And I sit on the management side of the house. So this presentation is going to be a little bit different probably from what maybe you were thinking about when we talk about turtles. It's not going to be very turtle or biology centric, but it's going to be a little bit more having to do with, like the title says, partnerships and how we work to implement recovery. And just a little bit of background on me. I've been in Hawaii now, I don't even know, so I got here in 1996. I originally arrived to work with the monk seal program. I worked with the monk seal program for about 5 years and then transitioned over to fisheries, commercial fisheries with the Fishery Council, and then came over to NOAA in 2008. So I've been in this position for a while, working on building conservation throughout the Pacific. All right, let's see if this slide will move forward for me. Okay. Oops. Yeah. All right. So just a brief outline of the presentation to come. I'm going to start off with a summary of threats and the status of species, just to give us a kind of level footing on what I'm going to be talking about. Introduce a little bit about recovery planning and how we go about organizing and coordinating recovery, which then leads into the partnerships, because it can't be done alone. And we need that whole Pacific-wide Ohana to implement recovery. And then kind of conclude with how you can help and how the public can be engaged. All right, so just starting, really kind of 101, sea turtles are air-breathing, long-lived, slow-growing marine reptiles that depend on both land and sea. Now, they depend on land, obviously, because they lay eggs, and then sea is where they spend the majority of their time in the marine environment. They are the living representatives of a group of reptiles that have existed on Earth and traveled our seas for over 50 million years. And so they are related to all the animals you see on the screen, including those dinosaurs. So they've been around a really long time. And because of that, because they've been around for so long, both sea turtles and humans evolved together. And as a result, they are a species of high cultural and ecological value. So they are really ingrained in much of our cultural heritage as well. So now within the Pacific Island region, out here in the Pacific, we have 5 species of sea turtles. You may think we only have one because probably that's the one you mostly see, but we actually have 5. The leatherback, the loggerhead, and the olive ridley. Hopefully you guys can see my pointer. These are our open ocean migrators. These guys live pretty much offshore. You're never really going to see them in Hawaii. Leatherbacks are migrating across the Pacific. You'll see a slide of that a little bit later on. Loggerheads only nest in Japan and migrate across the Pacific to Mexico and then back again during their lifetime. Olive ridley turtles also India and Mexico, and they crisscross the Pacific. So they're open ocean pelagic species. Our island associated species are the green turtle and the hawksbill turtle. So these are the ones that are always kind of really more close to shore. They kind of need those coastal habitats to survive. And the green turtle, obviously, we have most of here in Hawaii, but we do also have a hawksbill turtle population, and I'll go into that a little bit later as well. All right, so these are endangered and threatened species, and so we're going to go over their threats a little bit. Now, the historic threat to all sea turtle species was the overharvest for meat, eggs, shell, and bone, right? So for centuries, and as you recall, as I mentioned, turtles and humans evolved together, and so there was an evolution of use as well that kind of went through this whole process over centuries of time. But you can imagine when there was plenty of turtles, densities, high abundances of turtles with low abundances of humans, there was probably some level of sustainability going on with this level of harvest that was also culturally related and having to do with the elite and the chiefs and who was able and allowed to actually eat turtle. So anyhow, so that harvest sort of kind of transitioned over time and it became commercialized. And once it became commercialized, that's when we started to really see populations plummet. Current threats, though, so that's a bit historic. Current threats, though, are more related to humans, having to do with climate change, increasing temperatures, sea level rise. Just a little bit of their biology here is that sea turtles have temperature-dependent sex determination, which means the temperature of the nest, the incubation temperature of the nest, determines if you're going to be male or female. So warmer temperatures produce females, cooler temperatures, incubation temperature in the nest produces males. So, so this is kind of the really cool thing about turtles. So, but you can imagine as nesting beaches get warmer and warmer, you're going to get more and more females. And we're starting to see that Pacific-wide in many different places. So climate change is a real big one here for turtles. In addition to sea level rise, you have this issue with habitat loss. So you're losing habitats because of sea level rise. You also got a lot of development happening on beaches. Most people want to live near beaches and coastal habitats. And so it's kind of a double whammy where you're getting the loss of nesting beaches related to sea level rise as well. And then fishery bycatch, both pelagic open ocean and coastal fisheries. Disease, of course, is sort of ubiquitous among a lot of populations. Here in Hawaii, our primary disease tends to be fire papilloma, the tumor disease, boat strikes, and then public disturbance and harassment. So these are a lot of threats that these populations are dealing with. And because of that, they are hyper protected, honestly. They are protected under state and territory laws. They're protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act, or the ESA. I'm going to say ESA probably a lot during this course of this talk, and that's what I'm talking about. It's the Federal Endangered Species Act. And under that act, there's all these rules about what's allowable, what's not allowable. And basically, in short, it's illegal to harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, or collect a sea turtle. Some of these terms are very clear cut, hunt, shoot, you know what that means, the definition of that. But things like harass and harm is a little bit on the gray area. Like, what does that mean to harass and harm a turtle if you're not killing it? So, so this is kind of the world where I live in a little bit. NOAA has also, with partners together, have developed best practices and guidelines that if you follow those guidelines, then you are less likely to harass and harm. So when there's a gray area, following guidelines is really the best. I'll get into that as well later on. And then they're also protected under international law. So under CITES conventions, which prohibits the international trade of sea turtles or sea turtle products between countries and among countries. So they're the most sort of like, these are the bulldog rules of protection for sea turtles. And so now in the United States, sea turtles are managed or co-managed by NOAA Fisheries and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we work in collaboration with states and territory governments. So NOAA Fisheries is responsible for turtles when in the water, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is responsible for turtles when on land. So nesting turtles, basking turtles is Fish and Wildlife, in water populations of turtles is NOAA Fisheries. That's kind of how we sort of divvy up the game board, but we do work together, and it's not always a clear line. So now all ESA listed species, all of the sea turtles that are listed, and they all are listed, have recovery plans. Any ESA listed species has a recovery plan, and that plan provides a roadmap for conservation, protection, and management. It sort of tells us what to do. So we're not just sort of hitting blindly. These plans identify the recovery criteria, like what criteria we need to reach to be able to be delisted, and the essential actions that must be taken to recover the species. And what I have here is the cover pages of two of our recovery plans for green turtle and hawksbill. And if you're curious, you can go online and you can Google green turtle recovery plan, and you can see everything that's in there, and the same thing with the hawksbill and all the species. So now within the recovery plans, we have all of these actions, right? And there's so many of them. I could never put them all here on a screen, but just to give you a flavor of what those actions are, what those recovery plan tasks are. Number one is to protect and manage turtles on nesting beaches. And then under that, you need to do certain things like eliminate direct take of turtles and their eggs, reduce nest predation, reduce, the effects of lighting, collect information on populations, define stock boundaries, and so on and so forth. It keeps going. So there's a huge list of things that would need to happen. And then in the marine environment, protect and manage turtles in marine habitats. Again, reduce direct take of turtles, determine adult migration routes, reduce fishery interactions, and so on and so forth. So there's all these lists of things that we need to actually do to get to where we can recover a species. But, okay, and this is the big but, many of these activities, I would even say most of these activities cannot be done by NOAA and Fish and Wildlife alone, right? So we must rely on partnerships, both with federal partners, other federal partners like the Navy, the Army Corps, like, so on and so forth, state partners and community partners to implement recovery actions. Like without partners, we can't put all of those actions into play. Now, our biggest tool to actually implement projects is through grants. And so I'm going to go through some of the grants, a lot of the grants that we've got, because these are our boots on the ground. These are our guys that really are doing the hard work that sometimes, I'm just one person in the office. And so I need a team of people. And the best way to do that is through grants. I'm going to go over our sea turtle stranding partners. We'll talk a little bit about what we're doing for green turtle protection in Hawaii, Hawksbill turtles monitoring and conservation, and then jump over to U.S. territory programs, and then which bridges us into international conservation activities. Okay, so Sea Turtle Stranding Network. We've got a vast network in Hawaii. We've got partners on all the islands, basically. Here on Oahu, we've got Hawaii Marine Animal Response as our primary stranding response partner, both for sea turtles and monk seals. And I think they also are doing seabirds now. On Maui, we've got Maui Ocean Center Marine Institute. And then on Kauai and the island of Hawaii, we've got partners all over. And so we get about maybe 200 to 300 or maybe even more sometimes turtles that strand, and people are calling us, do something. And so with these partners, we're able to actually do something. So a stranded turtle, just to get everybody on the same page, is an animal out of habitat or is dead, sick, or injured, right? All animals that are picked up from the stranding network that have the authority to do that kind of work come to NOAA for treatment and rehabilitation. Or if dead, necropsy, which is kind of an autopsy for a turtle, and where samples are collected and research can happen. And then if they are dead, disposal. Now, the data generated by the stranding program gives us insights into the primary threats affecting the population. Now, once I know what those primary threats are, then I can work with partners to develop programs to try to address those threats, for example. Now, here's the stranding network number. It's going to come up again throughout the course of this presentation, including on the last slide, but I'll encourage you to put that number into your phone so you have it. It's our statewide menu-based stranding network. And so it's good for seals, turtles, dolphins, whales, and seabirds. You can reach enforcement through that line. So it's menu-based, on Oahu, press 1. For turtles, press 2, so on. Just you go down the menu until you get to what you're looking for. So that's all I wanted to kind of say about the stranding network. It's vast, lots of turtles, and it gives us a sense of what gives us a pulse of the issues out there, like what's affecting the population, which helps us to then deal with things like how to protect the population. So moving into green turtle protections, if you live here in Hawaii, you have seen a lot of turtles, right? There's a lot of turtles in the water. There's a lot of turtles using habitats and basking. So Hawaii is super unique in that it's one of the only places in the world where turtles will deliberately crawl out of the water and sleep on the beach. So this doesn't happen everywhere. This is just very special to Hawaii. And so it's kind of a behavior that they have reclaimed, we believe, because probably when there was commercial harvest happening, those basking turtles were probably the easiest to get. And so that behavior was weaned out of the population very quickly. And as they've begun to recover over time, they've sort of lost that memory of being harvested and being pursued on land, and have started to reuse those habitats that were lost to them, which is really kind of cool. It gives us a great ability to engage with the species, to see them. We've got a massive tourism industry that is revolved around this behavior. And then here, what you see on this bar graph is the nesting trends. So you can see that the trend over time has increased. Obviously, we've seen more turtles in the water over time. So it does make sense that the nesting numbers would also go up. I'll just draw your attention to really, typically it's about 400 to 500 females per year. We're not talking thousands of animals. We're not talking, many, many hundreds of animals. It's pretty, between 2 and 5. Typically, it bounces back and forth. This is the island, East Island, where they would nest at, and we'll talk more a little bit about that. So the population we know is increasing. No surprise there. It isn't recovering. But I'll come back to the threat slide that I brought about earlier. There are still plenty of threats affecting this population. A lot of people ask, well, there's so many turtles, isn't it time to delist them? Well, the challenge is that there are still a lot of threats affecting the population. One of the primary ones having to do with habitat loss and sea level rise, and I'll show you a picture on that in just a moment. Fishery bycatch is a primary threat to the species, especially coastal fisheries, hook and line and gillnet. Disease has gone down over time, but it does continue to persist in the population. Boat strikes are increasing, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And then, of course, we've got the issue of public disturbance having to do mostly with those basking turtles. So with regards to sea level rise and the loss of nesting beaches, you may have heard a few years ago in October 2018, we had Hurricane Walaka come through, and it didn't really affect the main islands. Like, I don't think we ever even heard about it here in the main islands. It just suddenly, it was just something that went through the Northwesterns and it wiped out East Island. So this was the nesting beach, which is the primary index beach for our green turtles up at French Frigate Shoals. This is where our nesting trend that you just saw came from for over 40 years of data. And overnight, we just lost island. And so one of the questions is, how are the animals going to adapt now to the fact that their primary nesting beach is now gone? There's one more islet left within French Frigate Shoals. That's called Turn Island. And so now obviously turtles are going to have to start using that, and they have begun using it, but it's not really great habitat because I wish I had a photo of it. Actually, there was a runway at one time. It's kind of a landfill. It was a Loran station. It's highly contaminated. It needs a lot of restoration work to maintain it. It's a rough place for these guys. And so now the East Island has rebuilt over time. So over 2019, it started to rebuild, but it remains very unstable. And so habitat loss really is a big issue for this population. And interestingly enough, this year, we've started to see a lot more nesting turtles on the main islands, which is great. They're starting to lay their eggs in more baskets, so it's going to aid to population resilience over time. Nesting on the high islands is a lot more sense for this population. But again, it's going to take time. This is a species that takes a long time to evolve and change and grow. With regards to fishery interactions, so accidental interactions in coastal fisheries is the primary threat to our turtles here in Hawaii. And it's unfortunate that right now, even during this time of COVID, we're seeing a lot more fishing pressure because people are out of work and people have a lot more time on their hands. We're getting a lot more entanglements in Hawaii. So in working with DLNR, because really these are state managed fisheries. And so DLNR is really responsible for interactions that happen in their state fisheries. We've been working with DLNR in partnership with numerous community-based organizations to build fishermen capacity and awareness to reduce injuries and prevent interactions. And so many of you might have already heard about this program. I'm just going to go over it a little bit. It's kind of my punchline is it's okay to help. The point is that I didn't want fishermen, we don't want fishermen to be afraid of if they accidentally hook an animal. We want them to take action. If it's a monk seal, we want you to call, make a phone call. If it's a turtle and you can handle it, make a call, but also you can reel in that animal. You can cut the line as close to the hook as possible and then release that animal. You can leave the hook. We're requesting that fishermen don't attempt to take the hook out. Trying to take the hook out can cause more damage. And also for a turtle, a hook is sort of like a piercing. And I've seen turtles, we've had turtles come into the stranding program with hooks all over them and they're just fine. I have colleagues that have x-rayed turtles that have come in that are nesting and they've x-rayed them and they have hooks all on the inside because they've eaten hooks from longline fisheries and they're nesting and they're doing just fine. So a turtle seems to be incredibly resilient and they can handle hooks, but it's the line that tangles them up around their head, around their flippers, that causes mortality and death and injury and sort of maims them. So it's the line that's the worst part. So getting as much line off the animal before the animal gets away from you is really the biggest thing to help. And of course, minimizing lost gear on reefs. So whatever a fisherman can do to prevent gear loss on the reef is critical at this point. If you can minimize and reduce the amount of gear left on reefs, you're helping turtles, you're helping seals, and you're helping the reef stay healthy, of course. Now, with regards to boat strikes, remembering that turtles live near harbors and oftentimes in harbors on shallow reefs, and they surface often to breathe, and they will often stay on the surface for a while. They like to this is a basking population. They'll bask on the beach and they'll bask at the surface of the water. So keeping this in mind, we get about 20 to 25 boat strikes a year, which doesn't seem like a lot, but we think that we're getting only about 10% of those struck turtles, which could be up to 200 turtles a year. The problem is that it really disproportionately affects adults and large subadults. And that's the big issue here, is that we lose a good proportion of our nesting females every year to boat strikes. Just last week, I had a 100-centimeter female come in, and usually a boat strike turtle is a dead turtle. So, and just for perspective, a nesting size animal is about 90 centimeters, and this one was 100 centimeters. And so she was an old turtle, and it was just unfortunate to lose her. So our hot spots on Oahu is Kaneohe Bay and Pearl Harbor. Really, that's where, you know, a little bit in Maunalua Bay, but really Kaneohe with all that boat traffic, that's really our hot spot area for boat strikes. And of course, what we've begun to realize, though, is that most strikes occur near small boat harbors and near boat launches. No surprise, you get your boat in the water and boom, they just power out. But we really want people to slow down, and I'll talk more about that a little later on. Oh, and our message, just like with fishing, with it's okay to help, with boating, it's go slow, sea turtles below. So let's not forget that. And then going back to our issue with public disturbance. Now, while public disturbance may not result in a dead turtle, this constant sort of disturbance and flushing of animals and human interaction with animals really changes their behavior and just kind of really just negatively affects them. And in addition to the fact that it may not always be about the turtle, it sometimes is about the community that has to deal with watching what's happening to their turtles, right? And so we've come up with guidance to help reduce the potential for harassment and disturbance. If you recall early on when I was talking about what the ESA will allow, and there's those gray areas. So with harassment, with this population in particular, we've learned that about 10 feet of distance is a pretty decent space that keeps turtles doing what the turtle wants to do and also gives people what they want, which would be a nice view or a good photo or something. So 10 feet, 3 meters tends to be a really good, guideline. So if you stick with that guideline, then you're less likely to result in harassment. That could be a potential ESA infringement. So again, going back to in Hawaii, we view our honu with respect because again, remembering that this is a culturally sort of connected species, that we have some tight cultural relationships here, and it really stems with respect and giving these animals that reverence and just allowing them to be. And so these are pictures from Laniakea. So our group there, Malama no Honu, has been stewards of Laniakea, the turtles there at Laniakea for over 2 decades. They've got a great, network of people, and they've learned so much about the turtles that bask there. Honestly, what we know about basking turtles and their behaviors, we've learned from the work that Malama no Honu has done and the data that they've collected for us and speaking with the public and just really observing these animals. And they've got about a good consistency of about 25 turtles that really use Laniakea very consistently. And they know these animals and they know their history and they know when they're migrating to nest and everything. It's really kind of exciting and great. If you haven't had a chance to go check it out, go up there and talk to the volunteers. They've got a lot of information to share. But again, we have maybe 5 turtles that like to use Laniakea Beach. Unlike on Maui, where at Ho'okipa, for example, these are all basking turtles. I know it looks like rocks, but these are basking turtles. And I've heard that they've counted up to 135 turtles in one night. And so literally they start marching out of the water around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they'll sleep all night. And then in the morning they head back out. And, Hawaii Wildlife Fund has become the stewards of this area, doing what they can to protect and monitor as well, getting facial photos and trying to understand how many animals they've actually got using this area. But, if Oahu thinks they've got it bad, it's nothing like compared to Maui for sure. And so our hats go off to all the people out there that are, spending their time, all the volunteers that are spending their time on the beaches to talk to people and to reduce disturbance where they can. All right, so now shifting to hawksbill turtles a little bit. We have a small population of hawksbills that occur here in Hawaii. Very small. If you can see here, we've got about 10 to 15 animals that seem to nest over time. We've got the dark part of the graphs are the old turtles, and the light part is the new turtles. So turtles that have never nested before. And so we call them neophytes, or just new remigrants, and versus the old remigrants that have been coming back over time. And so we do have a nice proportion of new turtles that come every year. But one of our questions is, how come we don't have more and more old turtles that are sort of the remigrants that have been around. So what's happening to the older turtles? That's one of there's a lot of questions related to this population, and that's just one of them. With hawksbill turtles, the best way to tell them apart, if you look at the scales between their eyes, they have 4 scales here between their eyes and that hawk-like beak, unlike green turtles that have 2 scales between their eyes and then a flat type of beak. So looking at the face, if you're not sure, just look at the face and it'll tell you. If it looks like a bird, then it's a hawksbill. And we would love to know if you're seeing any hawksbills. If you're an avid waterwoman, and you're in the water a lot, you're swimming, you're diving, you're snorkeling, and you see hawksbills, we would love to hear about it. Take a photo, especially if you can. These pictures aren't great, but if you can take a photo of the side of their face, we can help to ID them. And there's a group on Maui that is IDing turtles with hawaiihawksbills.org. With regards to their protections and the projects that are going on to protect and monitor this population, basically Big Island and Maui are the 2 main spots for this population and where they nest. Hawaii Volcano National Park hosts the Hawaii Hawksbill Turtle Program, and they're doing just some great work protecting nests and hatchlings, monitoring nesting activity, doing community outreach. Hawaii Wildlife Fund as well on Maui, doing a lot of great work over there. Their primary threats tend to be predation from feral animals, cats mostly, rats, mongoose, and then we have a lot of environmental impacts as well. If you can see here, you've got a nest here on Maui, and you've got the water coming up, and the water is going to wash away that nest. And so you see our partners there relocating the nest to save those eggs. Basically, we're at a place with the hawksbill population that every nest and every hatchling is super valuable, and so we do everything that we can to protect that population. All right, now switching a little bit to sort of the bigger picture. Now, if our story just ended in Hawaii, if all we were talking about was Hawaii hawksbills and Hawaii greens, then we would be done. We wouldn't really have to, the story would end and we wouldn't need to go any further. But because our region extends all the way to the west here in Guam and CNMI and all the way to the south in American Samoa, the story continues, and there's a lot more that goes on here when it comes to sea turtle conservation, because if you can recall, we've got those 5 species that occur within our region, and they're crisscrossing throughout the Pacific. So just to give you a little snapshot, here's Guam and CNMI. We've done work in Yap as well quite a bit. And what you're looking at here are satellite tracks of nesting females. So after they finish nesting, we put a satellite transmitter on them, and they migrated out. And what this tells me as a coordinator is that if I want to help recover and coordinate with partners to recover species that occur in Guam and CNMI, I can't put all my attention and effort in Guam and CNMI. I have to pay attention to what's going on internationally in Japan, Taiwan, in the Philippines, because after they nest, they leave and they migrate out to international areas, right? So the territories are great for us in the sense that while it's challenging, it gives us a sense of the bigger picture. This is a much larger ocean, and these are globally, internationally shared species. So our territory programs are working really hard to protect nests and turtles. They're doing a lot of population monitoring, both in the water and on nesting beaches, and then a lot of community outreach. The harvest of turtles in these areas is still pretty intense, unfortunately. And so we have to work with the communities because, again, it's the communities that will drive conservation in many of these places. So all of the government programs in Guam, CNMI, and American Samoa are the ones leading this kind of work right now. Now, again, obviously, like I mentioned, working within our region, and because we have those international connections means we now need to look internationally, right? We can't just only look in our region. So when you look at, if you consider leatherback turtles, for example, we've got leatherbacks that nest in Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomons, and they crisscross the Pacific. Now our fisheries, here's Hawaii. Our fisheries, our commercial fisheries operate mostly in this area, kind of right around here. And unfortunately, sometimes they interact with the leatherback turtle. And so we have to now work to protect and recover. And you can tell in this picture, these are large animals. This is not an easy animal to work with. They're very large. They are super prehistoric. These guys are related to dinosaurs, absolutely. And they are crisscrossing the Pacific. They're going from over here all the way to California and then back again and foraging throughout these different areas. And so when you're dealing with an international species that's nesting in places like Indonesia, and foraging within the Western Pacific region, you've got to really know how to kind of work all of those partnerships and all those NGOs that are out there that, to try to galvanize everybody to kind of work together. Similar to American Samoa in the South Pacific. Here we're talking about green turtles, and American Samoa is our territory. And you could argue that we should focus all of our attention in American Samoa because that's where the turtle sort of originates from and exists there. But if you put satellite tags on them, now you see them migrating out, and you see that there's a great amount of animals that are using Fiji after they nest to forage there in Fiji and live, even all the way to the Solomons and Papua New Guinea and New Caledonia. So they're radiating out. So again, you cannot just focus all of your attention in one place. You kind of have to look at different places if your intention is to protect and recover these species. And now with regards to the international work that we do, again, dealing with partners and through a lot of grants. Now, if you're a US citizen and you're paying your federal taxes, a portion of those federal taxes goes into the funds that we get to use to deploy grants. And so this is kind of some of the great work. So I'd like to really share this with the public because it's work that you don't usually hear about. And you're always hearing about all this gloom and doom. And this is really great work. This is our tax dollars, being put where it really will benefit and do some really great stuff. And so we've got, work going on in Fiji right now and in Indonesia, and a lot of outreach, again, because to conserve and protect the species, you got to deal with the communities. Now, of course, coming back home a little bit, like what can you do? There's a lot of opportunities, obviously, for the public here in Hawaii to help. There's work, obviously, fishery bycatch is our primary threat, and so we can all work together to reduce fishery bycatch. We can work together to prevent boat strikes. We can all work together to set the standard with regards to viewing turtles responsibly. And then there's always reporting and citizen science that plays into this. And we love to engage with the public when it comes to turtles and what you're seeing and how that can fit into research. So just as I mentioned before, our goal is to reduce fishery bycatch, and fishermen are key to this. It's sort of like they're the first line in a sense, because that's where the interaction is happening. And we are encouraging folks to help if an accidental interaction happens. What you're seeing here is one of our decals, and we've got a number of decals. And at the end of this talk, there'll be some contact information and numbers and emails. And if you would like some of these decals, please email and we'll send them to you. So now again, this guidance is for fishermen only really at the time of an interaction. It's not for the general public. It's not for free swimming turtles. If you see a free swimming turtle that's got gear attached to it, we encourage you to call the Stranding number, and that will come up later in this talk. But this messaging really is designed for fishermen. There's a website here if you're interested. You could Google fishing around sea turtles or fishing around seals and turtles. It'll still get you to the same spot. We have a lot of great hints and tips, a lot of them developed by fishermen themselves that have, these master fishermen that have figured out techniques and strategies to potentially avoid interacting with turtles. So it's a good resource to take a look at if you're interested. And then for the public, for everyone else, participating in beach or reef cleanup activities is huge. I mean, that's a huge thing that you could do, that we could all do together. Getting as much gear off the reef is critical to protecting both turtles and seals. And of course, it helps our reef stay healthy. With regards to boat strikes, again, go slow, sea turtles below. Here's our boating decal. And we've developed some safe boating practices in partnership with DOBOR. Posting a lookout is key. There aren't just turtles in the water. There are swimmers in the water. There's divers. There's all sorts of things. There's hazards as well. So it's a safety measure even for the boater, not just for the turtles. So post a lookout, designate somebody on your boat to be the one that's looking out for hazards or turtles. Drive slowly. That's really the biggest thing that a boater can do, is drive slowly near harbors and boat launches especially. And when you're driving over shallow coral reefs. Maintaining no wake speeds within 200 feet from shore, and that's the DLNR regulation, so you do have to stay slow. And then wearing polarized sunglasses so you can see through the water and hopefully see turtles a little bit better. Okay, so now moving on to about enjoying turtles respectfully and enjoying them from a distance. So really, again, it comes down to sort of being that steward. being, you know, that community member that knows how to relay that information to the public, and things like, oh, in Hawaii, we respect our honu. We don't, you know, we don't harass them. We give them space. And when you can approach a situation that way, instead of saying something like, that's against the law, you're going to get a ticket, but being a little bit more like proactive in the sense of, in Hawaii, we act like this, not like that, right? And so again, maintaining that 10 feet, reminding people that they've got to zoom on their camera. And what I really like about this photo here is that this group just decided that they were going to promote this on their social media. And I love that. I love when a community group just decides to galvanize themselves and become stewards of an area and become stewards of a species. And they are promoting this on their own website. Like, this isn't even something that we're doing. It's something that they just decided to do. And I think it's really, really great, right? So doing whatever you can to just get that message out there. So the point is, don't be these guys. Nobody wants to see this sort of behavior in Hawaii. And again, it's not always about the turtle. It's about the host culture. It's about people expecting there to be respect happening around these animals, and that they be, you know, treated in a certain way. And when they're not treated in that way, that's when, you know, we start to hear about it, and you may get a fine in this case. So we've got enforcement is starting to really step up. So don't be these guys. Go ahead and be these guys, right? There's lots and lots of ways to observe and enjoy these animals. You can get super creative. You can, if you're just hanging out and just watching, you're going to get a much better show than if you're chasing after them and harassing them, and you're not going to end up with a real pissed off community as well. So, okay, with reporting and citizen science. So this is sort of, this is where I make the plea of, you know, help us to help you in a sense. For marine wildlife emergencies, please report if you ever see a dead or injured turtle on the beach, or anything that's unusual that you're not sure about. You know, you can talk to the stranding associate that will answer the phone, and she'll talk, or he will talk you through what you're seeing, and you guys will determine if there's something that needs to happen next. Hawksbill turtles. If you see any hawksbill turtles, whether they're on the beach or in the water, we would love to know about this. So the more we know about where hawksbills are and what their habitats are, the more then we learn, and the more we can even go out and start to engage and collect data and capture these animals and tag them and that sort of thing. If you see any hatchlings, hatchlings are teeny. There's a little picture of a little hawksbill hatchling right here. They're small. If you see any little hatchlings on the beach, if you see nesting activity, tracks, like this right here are some tracks that are going all the way up into the berm. Usually if it's a basking turtle, they're not going to go all the way up to the vegetation. So if you see something that's suspect, give us a call. We'll come check it out. And oops, sorry, that went fast. Okay, or numbered turtles. So here's a good picture of a numbered animal right here. When our biologists are doing research in the Northwesterns or even here in the main islands, they will number an animal, become sort of our poor man's satellite tag in a sense. So we began to realize, like, after they're getting numbered in the Northwesterns, they're migrating back to the main Hawaiian Islands, and now they're pointing out, they're telling us what are their important habitats. They're telling us where they like to live when they come back to the main islands. And so if you see an animal with a number on it, it's either been like part of the science program, it's been or it's gone through the Stranding program and it's gone through some kind of rehabilitation. And so we would love to hear about any animals that you see that have numbers on them. Take a picture, don't disturb them, and then you'll email it to us, and I'll just give you that address in just a second. So this is a really great way too. Like, if you see a numbered animal, you can ask questions about that animal. You can find out when it was tagged, what its history is. So it's a really neat way to just sort of engage with the population and engage with scientists and get a sense for, you know, what this population is doing. And this is pretty much my last slide. And so this is, I'm going to leave this up while we're all, you know, asking questions, or and talking here and talk story a little bit. This is our phone number again, the Stranding number, 888-256-9840. It's a menu-based number. It's really all you need for monk seals, turtles, dolphins, whales, and seabirds. I need to add seabirds here. You can reach enforcement through here. Our website, if you have any questions, or if you see a numbered animal, because a numbered animal isn't an emergency really, but you can just email us those photos at respectwildlife@noaa.gov. You can also download the DLNR tip app on your phone. I have it on my phone. You can, if you see something happening in real time, if you see some disturbance happening, you see something that just doesn't seem right, people are harassing animals, maybe somebody just tossed a turtle in the back of a truck and you're like, oh, that's not good. So things like that happen sometimes. And so if you have the DLNR tip app, You just take a picture and that goes straight to DLNR in real time. It's almost better than calling them. And you can download that from the Apple Store or, and even for, any phone will download the TIP app. And so with that, I will open it up to questions. If anybody's got some questions. Gavin, do we have any questions, or do we have people out there?
Yeah, there are people here. If you guys have a question, you guys can kind of turn off your microphone and ask it. And then once you guys are done with it, if you could turn it off.
Yeah.
So anybody have any questions?
I'll leave this slide up, and be sure you put that number in your phone so you've got it. Because it's always when you're at the beach and you're like, oh, I know there was a number, but now if you put it in your phone, you've got it forever. I
actually got a question. So have you had any leatherbacks come up in the Hawaiian Islands before?
We have had some random sightings. Long time ago, there was a turtle I thought was nesting. I want to say 2007 on Maui, one leatherback. And I've heard reports from people that have been paddling and boating off the south point of the Big Island. They've seen leatherbacks. They saw something that was really huge. And then after they saw a presentation of mine or something, or they saw a photo, they realized that's what I saw, because it's those really distinctive ridges across the back. So, really random if it would be on the beach, but yeah, so definitely in our waters.
What makes sense is South Point.
South Point, yeah, really offshore. Like guys are like, oh, I was a mile offshore. It's like you got to be offshore, like out in the water to see a leatherback. Yep.
Yeah, cool. Anybody else got any questions? There's a few with phone numbers, so I can't see who that is.
Let's see. See if there's any. Oh, there's anything in the chat.
No, I didn't see any.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, this was a kind of a different presentation, more like I just feedback in the sense to the community and to the public. All of your taxes, all of your federal taxes that you pay fund all of this work, and so I wanted to give people a sense of what kind of things that we're doing with it and how it's kind of being put into work, for the species and for recovery.
I got a question. Someone on the phone, but they asked, it's from Brooke. She asked, is Oahu doing a good job of protecting the new sea turtle nests on our beaches, especially the ones at Bellows?
So Bellows, thankfully, the Marine Corps closed the beaches, right? They closed Bellows, so no camping, and they've done a great job. They've gotten really, really serious about turtles nesting out there, and they've protected them. They've given them a huge, boundary so no complaints there. Bellows and the Marine Corps, they're doing really good work, and they're monitoring what's happening. I think we're waiting to see how many turtle nests we end up at the end of the season, because a lot of the nesting activity might not have been actual nests. It may have been false nests, because sometimes a turtle will try things out a couple and they may have called it a nest, but it wasn't a nest. It was like a false crawl, we call it. So, but we'll know, and they're monitoring every night. And so they'll know, the best way to know if it was a nest is if you see hatchlings come out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so at the end of the season, we'll have a better count of how many nests we actually got.
Cool.
Yeah. But I think right now I've heard rumors around like 15 nests, but over on the North Shore, there's been a lot more nesting activity, which is, I've heard upwards of 80 nests maybe. So yeah, this has been a pretty stellar year for turtles. I think, being less people on the beach maybe in April, sort of like turtles were like, oh, there's a beach I could use over there. It's kind of quiet, but hard to say. We can't ask them. So we just gotta, and that's part of the science that goes into this. And so we can collect genetic samples from these nests, and then we can try to track females over time. There's a lot of data that can come from doing the genetics on nests and on dead animals. And so, yeah. And one thing I will say is what we have learned, because turtles historically didn't always nest in the main islands, is that as they do continue to nest more and more, the lighting impacts is something we need to start looking at, because turtles can get disoriented, and hatchlings especially can get disoriented from lights. So if the lights are behind the nest and not when they emerge, they want to go straight out to sea because the horizon is the brightest spot for them. But if there are bright lights behind them, they will go behind them. And so in some instances, we've found turtles in places where they shouldn't have been. And so now that we know how much they like the main islands here, we're going to have to start working with landowners and getting them to turn down the lights during hatching season. And we're in the middle of hatching season right now. So nests are hatching September, October, November. You're going to start seeing more hatchlings around. And so again, if you see a hatchling, give us a call.
Is there another question?
I got a question.
Yeah.
So I was actually going to ask about the light problem for baby turtles, and specifically, I guess, it sounds like we're not doing a lot about that. But are there efforts to, I mean, one, prevent that kind of thing within the islands, and two, do we have any way to monitor baby turtles? Because I know you're saying that every hatchling basically counts at this point. So are we monitoring them? Is there a way to tell when they're gonna hatch? Are we able to monitor and make sure that they can, as many as possible, can make it to the shoreline, or is that more like a up in the air kind of thing?
Yeah, well, so a nest will incubate for about 2 months, about 60 days, but there is a bit of a range. It can go like 55 to 75. It just depends on what the temperature was, the incubation temperature was. So you can predict when a nest will hatch. Really, the most important, I say every hatchling counts is really for hawksbills because we've got such a small population of hawksbills. With green turtles, we kind of have a lot of green. I'm not too worried if we lose a hatchling of a green turtle. It's just sort of how it goes. But we do what we can, absolutely. And so the volunteers that are monitoring the nesting activity, if you saw their spreadsheet, they've got a really amazing spreadsheet of when the nest was laid, when they expect that it will hatch, and the range. And then they have volunteers that are checking, and then the same thing. So they're really organized track of what they expect to happen. And it's just those surprise nests. It's the nest that we didn't know was there, right? The nest that the turtle was sneaky. We didn't recognize it. It came up in the middle of the night, it laid, and nobody saw it. Nobody knew that it was a nest. And then that nest hatches, and then we have hatchlings that might go in every direction. And those are the nests that, where you might lose some hatchlings because they went the wrong way. So I think the more and more like the North Shore starts to get an understanding that they have a lot of nesting happening up there. And now that we know that Bellows is a spot that they may like, we'll see if they come back next year. Maybe we'll be better about keeping the bathroom lights off, that kind of stuff. So we're learning, and we'll get there. So this is a new year for us too, because they've never really nested in the main islands, especially on Oahu. Over on Kahuku is really the spot that they used to use the most. And Kahuku at James Campbell National Park is a great place for them to nest. It's really protected. There's no lights. It's dark. It's a great habitat for them to be nesting at over there. But as soon as they start now using habitats where people are, like North Shore, we're going to have to start thinking about some management measures and having more turtle-friendly lighting. A lot of what goes on in Florida, for example, with turtle-friendly this, turtle-friendly that, that kind of stuff. So there might be more messaging going out in the future with regards to nesting.
I think I have another question. So are the nests on North Shore new?
New?
Yeah.
Well, we don't really know the females that are nesting, so we don't know who these turtles are. If they nested here before or not, but there's more nests this year for sure than there have been in the past.
Okay.
So we don't have typically on a nesting beach, on a designated nesting beach that is a nesting beach, you'll have beach rangers or volunteers or interns or whoever monitoring that beach every night, walking the beach all night long to intercept the turtle and then tag it, measure it, data on it. We're not doing that here. We're waiting to see the nest in the morning, by track, because it's just too many beaches. We don't have the resources to do that sort of thing. And because we don't have a really designated nesting beach, they're kind of place.
Yeah.
We can't really do that, right? And so we're just point right now, we're just waiting to see the tracks and then go, oh, there's a nest, and then confirm that nest in the morning.
Cool.
Yeah.
Anybody else got any questions?
So I just got notification that my battery is going to die. So
Okay. Yeah.
hopefully it's good.
Okay.
So if there's
We
no
can
more
wrap it
questions,
up.
that's fine too. Yeah,
Yeah.
just if I go dark, that's what's happened.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Irene, for presenting. And if you guys have any more questions, just email
Yeah.
her.
Thanks
And,
to everyone who hung in, who listened in tonight. I appreciate it.
thank you guys all, and you guys have a great night. Thanks, Irene.
Okay, mahalo. Aloha.